As we begin the lame duck session with not only Donald Trump, Wendy, in the Oval Office, but also up on Capitol Hill. Noteworthy that the Speaker of the House is holding a news conference talking about a new majority before the House is technically even called.
That's right. That's right. They're, 3 or 4 seats away from a full majority, but 3 or 4 seats can make a huge difference.
Yeah,
and so, but it does look like they're on track to get the majority. Mike Johnson has good reason to be confident there. And then the showman arrives in Washington, right? I mean, going to the White House, he'll make a big show of it. There is some reporting out there that he is going to tone down the anti-Biden rhetoric that has marked his campaign and behave himself at the White House tomorrow, and then come to the Hill and do the same thing.
Well, as we consider the House majority here, Wendy points out, Michelle, rightly so, that even if Republicans do retain the majority, it's going to be once again by very narrow margins. Yeah, and all that said, Donald Trump is still pulling from what could be a very narrow majority as he fills out his cabinet and those who will be close to him. Today, officially announcing Congressman Mike Waltz will be his national security advisor after he announced Elise Stefanik. The congresswoman from New York will be ambassador to the UN. So paint that picture for us of what his foreign policy specifically is looking like through these choices, some of which, of course, has been spending the past years in the House.
Yeah, I think first off, he's seen as being comfortable pulling away some of these congressmen, these lawmakers to the White House because of what will succeed them, even though it might take some time and it might kind of tie up some of his legislative priorities. But so set that aside for a moment, and you can kind of see where foreign policy is taking shape. Of course, we're hearing a lot about the peace through strength strategy, which is something that those who are perhaps vying for posts in a Trump administration are continuing to champion, continuing to point to as already being successful in some regard. So we see that from the likes of Elbridge Colby, who's perhaps in contention for being in a defense post as he's coming from a Pentagon official capacity in the first Trump administration. But most of all, we're seeing a lot of China hawks. Stefanik herself has talked about China being top of her agenda as a New York congresswoman. We see that from Marco Rubio, who we have yet to have officially confirmed as Secretary of State, but is pointing to being as the front runner and in contention for that post. We see it from others that are both named and unnamed as yet for a Trump post in the next administration.
Well, to Michelle's point, Heyman Capital's Kyle Bass talked about the China hawks being eyed for roles by the Trump administration earlier today in a conversation on Bloomberg TV. Let's listen.
These people understand the enormity of the threat that China poses to the Western world and to the security of the United States. Rubio is a very, very strong pick for Secretary of State. He will bring with him the gravitas. And I think the Democrats are really worried about Trump's stance on ending the Ukrainian war in one day by ceding advances to Putin. And if you know Rubio, I don't think that's going to happen.
Wendy, what do you make of the Marco Rubio idea for Secretary of State? Once a political rival of Donald Trump's, although we understand Donald Trump's a big fan of conversion, and they agree on a lot of things, from China to Ukraine, too.
They do, and to Israel and the Middle East as well. No, Marco Rubio is a choice that is probably one of the few that induces gasps or quizzical looks. He was on Senate Foreign Relations, chairman when Republicans are in charge. He is an old foreign policy hand. On the other hand, notice there is no confirmation yet of his nomination to Secretary of State.
Right.
He is the senator who ran against Trump in 2016. They had that infamous talk about hand size. Rubio coined the phrase never Trumper. So there are reasons that if Trump wanted to look back and say, do I really want this guy? If loyalty is the big test, as you say, he does love a convert to the Trump, to Trump loyalists. But Marco Rubio has, in that vein only, I think, a checkered past, and that may come up.
We just have a headline crossing the terminal now on another selection by Donald Trump, who has just announced that Stephen Witkoff is going to be special envoy to the Middle East. He, of course, is one of the chairs of Trump's inaugural committee. He's a real estate investor from Florida. We are just getting this news, Michelle. But what does this suggest as we see yet again an appointment of a position that isn't going to need to be confirmed by the Senate as he amasses his inner circle? It's not necessarily going to be with the consent of anyone else.
Well, I think two things to take away from that. Of course, yes, that point that there are going to be a lot of informal positions. We're still waiting on how Elon Musk or RFK Jr. might play a role in this administration. The thinking is that it would be a lot easier for them to take on an informal role, a White House post, a czar post, what have you, that doesn't require the Senate confirmation that, Trump will have so badly need to get things going under his legislative priorities. But the other thing is that's another Middle East pick. Earlier today, we had, as you mentioned, Mike Huckabee as the ambassador to Israel. I think Trump, you're going to start seeing even more often, is really trying to drive home, again, that peace through strength message that we're going to end all wars. He's famously said repeatedly that he's going to end the Ukraine conflict on day one or before that. Yeah. He also wants to do the same with Israel and Gaza and has amped up his support for Israel in the process. So I think we're going to see a very different strategy from what we've been used to the past 4 years.
Is this truly just a loyalty test? Does Lee Zeldin have know-how when it comes to managing the environment? Does Mike Huckabee? I realize a lot of different people get ambassadorships, but Israel's a big job. That's typically one that goes to a diplomat. What do you make of these
It not
picks?
only usually goes to a diplomat, it often goes to a Jewish diplomat, being Israel.
Yeah.
What's really interesting to me about Huckabee, and I'm glad you asked me about it, is that he is an evangelical Christian who, who is of that group who wants Israel to remain a Western democratic ally, so that because of the holy sites in Israel that are dear to Christianity, of course. But so that is an interesting pick. Mike Huckabee will probably show very little interest in a two-state solution, in resolving the brutality of the Israeli response, in the sort of things that, that a lot of voters in America were interested in at the time of the election. And as far as Lee Zeldin, that is proof of this loyalty test theory. As far as I know, I mean, he was a congressman from New York. He ran for governor of New York unsuccessfully. I don't know that he has any environmental background or has ever evinced any interest in environment or fossil fuel, sort of things. So it's going to be really interesting. He is, though, a fan of deregulation. Yeah. And that's, I think, what Trump wants most in the EPA.